So this conception of liberty, which is informed by economic theory, is new in a historical perspective. Antiquity did not have this conception of liberty. The Greeks had a conception of liberty, but this conception of liberty was confined to the political community. There was no liberty outside of the political community, outside of the polis. Outside of the polis, there was only conflict and risky behavior. For the Romans, it was the same thing. The Romans had a concept of liberty within the empire, but not outside of the empire. There was no notion of how people belonging to different political communities could be involved in an overarching network of peaceful exchange. This did not exist. There was a Pax Romana only to the extent that the confines of the empire reached. And then within the empire, the Romans created something that was indeed unheard of and necessary for the advancement of modern civilization, namely the concept of universal law or natural law. The Romans were the inventors of natural law. And the way they did it was because they had to rule over different peoples, and the different peoples had different law codes, exactly as Professor Hopper has explained to us just an hour ago. Right, so this is not just a theoretical exercise. Right? He said we can have different insurance companies and they might offer product differentiation. Some group might be ruled according to Mosaic law, another group according to canon law, and et cetera, et cetera. This was the actual practice in the Roman Empire. Right? So we had different groups, they had different laws, and they were judged according to this law. But then there was still the problem of regulating the relationships between these different groups. So what if a member of the Jewish nation, at the time there was no nation, of the Jewish tribe, got in conflict with a Phoenician merchant and so on? What had to happen then? So then the Roman emperors encouraged the formation of a universal law code that would apply to such cases of conflicts. And this law code was, at the beginning, formulated by one major civil servant. So he set up all the set of rules according to experience, right? They judged the different cases and said, so in this case, we could apply this principle because it was a universal principle. And so they had a list of all these stipulations, and later on systematized this list and so on, and it was revised more or less every year, right? So it's a constant improvement of the product, so to say. And eventually, as a result of many hundreds of years of experience in educating cases, the Romans had developed a whole law book or code of law, of universal law, applying to all nations. And this is the Corpus Juris that came into full definition in the beginning of the 6th century. Now, but still, right, this universal law was not strictly speaking concerned to be universal beyond the borders of the empire. This is an idea that no Roman had. It held only within the empire. Things changed then after the collapse of the Roman Empire and the emergence of a new intellectual movement in the Middle Ages, which was scholasticism, about which we also heard already this afternoon in our lecture on epistemology. So we had this scholastic movement that arrived with Albert the Great and Albertus Magnus and then St. Thomas, and which strived to find natural law not only in the analysis of nature, and not only try to, so not only, well, I mean, should be start more fundamentally. The main concern of the churchmen was always the salvation of the soul. But they pushed the analysis further away. So they were asking the question, why do people sin? Why do people fall into temptation and so on? So for many centuries, they just inquired the individual soul, but eventually they came to extend this analysis to the environment of individual human beings. So they started analyzing natural forces, it started analyzing nature, physics, biology, and so on, and they eventually also turned to the laws of society. So all this was new, and all this came into full swing in the 13th century. Now the churchmen, this new scholasticism, this new intellectual movement, operated under different conditions. They were present in all countries, and there were now different countries that had succeeded the Roman Empire and cooperated with one another without a common code of law. There was no empire, no one political community that imposed its rule on all countries. There were now different countries with different citizens cooperating amongst one another, but also with the citizens of other countries. So now the concept of natural law had acquired a whole new meaning. It now really meant, it was clear that natural law stretched beyond any political community and that it covered humanity as a whole. And in this conception, of course, the concept of private property played a central role. Right? So you have, in Catholic doctrine, you have four so-called cardinal virtues. You have prudence, justice, temperance. Oh, wow, I don't remember what the fourth one was. It will come back later. This was probably one of my sins, yeah. They're always weakness. I'm surprised that I remember temperance. So the crucial virtue is prudence, which covers anything that pertains for us today to intellectual life. So it doesn't mean prudence, being careful and so on. It means circumspection, taking into consideration all circumstances that determine our course of action, both in the present and in the future. And second to this virtue was only the virtue of justice. And at the center of this virtue of justice is the concept of suum cuique, to each according to what is due to him. And what is due to each person is, in fact, his property. So private property was at the center of thinking about justice and universal justice as from the Middle Ages. Then came the Reformation, and the Reformation, the Protestant movement, did not at all aim, as you might think, while watching what is going on in certain Protestant churches, especially in Europe today, did not at all aim at overthrowing the established moral order and the established virtues, but precisely at reinforcing them. And so the Protestants thought that the Catholics were in fact too lax. And that was the reason Luther went to Rome and thought he had come to Sodom and Gomorrah, thought that this is way too lax. I mean, the Catholics have fallen from the faith. They are no longer just, they're no longer prudent, they will all go to hell. And we need to reform the church, that is bringing back into the form into which it was brought by the creator of the church, namely by Jesus Christ. So, as from the Reformation then, so we're talking at the beginning of the 16th century, come about 200 or 300 years of fierce religious competition between the Catholic Church on the one hand and various Protestant denominations on the other hand, all vying for the best definition of what the true moral order is. These things only changed in the 20th century. In the 20th century, the Protestant churches have started competing in the opposite direction, that is, trying to come up with new definitions that would allow Christians not to adhere to traditional standards of moral behavior. And this is the reason for the decline of most Protestant denominations today. So in any case, so the point is then, as a consequence of this competition and religious production, encouragement of moral behavior, we created the condition in Europe, in the offsprings of European culture in the various colonies, in the Americas, but also in Asia and in Africa, right, for the operation of spontaneous societies that did not have to rely on a monopolist law enforcer. Right? Societies, by and large, functioned independent of the presence of an emperor, of one monopolist police organization. Now this, then, were the conditions under which one group of the scholastic intellectual movement of the scholastics, namely the school of Salamanca, right? So Spanish and Italian theologians headquartered in the Spanish city of Salamanca, discovered for the first time the existence of what Hayek would later call a spontaneous order. The market economy and the economy as a whole could function by and large independent of the existence of governments. The market, it was a self-enforcing order, and it relied on moral behavior, spontaneous moral behavior from all its participants, and in itself it encouraged such behavior because the liberty that existed was an ordered liberty that enforced responsibility. And if you enforce responsibility, if the negative consequences of your choices fall back on yourself, then you have interest in acting prudently and respecting traditional moral standards of behavior, which are not just decoration, but precisely protect you against adverse consequences of choices and bad choices. So the school of Salamanca for the first time discovered the existence of a spontaneous order. Right? There are laws of society that have not been enacted by any legislation, that have not been enacted by any king or tyrant and so on, but are regularities that exist independent of human willing. And successful economies are ruled by those laws, and violations of those laws entailed negative consequences for the economy as a whole. The next step, and this was a crucial breakthrough, arrived in the 18th century with the discoveries of the causes of the wealth of nations, to adopt the title of Adam Smith's famous treatise. Right? Adam Smith was fairly unoriginal as far as individual points of this intellectual edifice were concerned, but he was the writer who brought all of this together into one picture. So Adam Smith, for the first time, created a literary work that presented the operation of the developed market economy, a relatively developed market economy, and pointed the true forces of material progress, the true forces of causes of material progress for society as a whole were not, as most people at the time had it, government intervention in the form of trade policy, what we would call today trade policy, and in the form of monetary interventionism. But the true causes of wealth were the division of labor and capital accumulation. So we had then, at the end of the 18th century, reached a new stage, right? We had for the first time developed a theory of liberty. Adam Smith talked of the natural condition of liberty, the junction of natural law, the junction of a new definition of liberty, with a combination of economic theory. Right? So the defense of liberty was not only made in moral terms, not in theological terms, but now also in economic terms. And the disciples of Adam Smith, the classical economists, would reinforce this consideration over the next century. Among them was Frédéric Bastiat, whom I already mentioned. So he has a couple of famous papers which I encourage you to read in case you haven't done it, and also Leandro to translate them in case it hasn't yet been done. And for example, his essay on the law, or his essay on property and freedom,